This episode will be completely taken out of context. Welcome to the Fact Check This podcast.
All right, Fact Check This, and I'm going to try to get through this fairly quick. There's quite a bit of information, and I've managed to add more to it as I've looked at other stuff. So what was originally a single, relatively short little piece on X, I picked up a second one, and then I ended up finding a third one, which is actually going to be the first one in the order that we do all this. And I'm going to try to go fairly quick because I did work last night and I'm kind of tired. But at the same time, I want to cover all of this because it is a lot of what I think is interesting stuff. And it all ties really well together, I think, anyway. So let's dive right in. The topic is, why did women move to the left? But first, we're going to talk about the difference between male and female tolerance of opposing political ideas. And there's a longer article covering this topic, but I'm going to use the condensed version for the purpose of time. And then we'll we'll talk about the difference in acceptance of differing political ideologies between males and females. And then we'll look at kind of the shifting political landscape of males trending more conservative while females tend to trend not just more liberal, but more like radically liberal. And then we'll talk about the problem with speaking your truth to kind of round it out, because I thought it was interesting, and it's short, and it's kind of it's a good capper for this, because I think that's also a largely feminine thing, that my truth nonsense, whereas males are more interested in objective, factual truth, not emotional, personal truth. So let's dive right in. We'll start with the male students show more tolerance for political enemies than females even show for their own allies. And that's kind of the crazy addition to this, is not just they show more tolerance for their political enemies than females show for their political enemies. More tolerance for their political enemies than the females even show for their own allies. And this is something that we talk about when talking about women, is like, women are their own worst enemies. Like, nobody tears women down faster and more brutally than other women. It's like, you see it when I've talked about the WNBA and like other cases of this before. Like, it's an impressive look at culture and society, and honestly, the evils of the feminist movement and what feminism has done to women and to culture. So here we go. Suppose you're a democratic socialist who has been invited to speak at a college campus. Who do you think would be more likely to try to silence you? A left-leaning woman or a right-wing man? Now, it may be reasonable to assume someone with a similar ideology would be more tolerant of your views, but new data by FIRE suggests that's not the case. Amazingly, it turns out men are often more tolerant of the opposite side than women are of their own side. And I'm not going to go into the chart. You can find the longer pieces that go more in depth into talking about the plot points on the chart itself. I'm just going to kind of focus on the article. All right. The data taken from FIRE's annual college free speech rankings reveals that overall tolerance for opposing views is low among both female and male students, but the males consistently display a far more tolerance than females, regardless of their politics. In fact, with the exception of male libertarians, who are slightly more tolerant, men of all political ideologies have roughly the same level of tolerance as each other. And the same is true of women. In other words, it's not that liberals are more tolerant than conservatives or vice versa. Liberal and conservative men are more or less equally tolerant, as are liberal and conservative women. It's being a man, liberal or conservative, that makes the difference. And so here we get to the more on the chart. So the plot points that these are the men and these are the women on the graph. While political affiliation makes people more biased towards speakers who share their views, it affects their overall willingness to let speakers speak, regardless of ideology, very little. But regardless of party or ideology, men are so much more tolerant than women that the gender tolerance gap dominates the ideology difference. In fact, men are over 3.5 times more likely than women to be perfectly tolerant of opposing views, meaning they would definitely allow any campus speaker. So why does such a large gender tolerance gap exist? FIRE's data doesn't give us a confident answer, but these findings are consistent with decades of literature investigating political tolerance or support for censorship, which shows that men are, on average, more tolerant and less censorial than women. But the data does rule out a few possibilities. You might wonder, for instance, whether women are more censorial due to being more personally affected by the positions of the hypothetical speakers our surveys asked about. But only one of the speakers argues for a position that disproportionately affects women, banning abortion. And the gender gap isn't greater for this speaker. So that doesn't seem to be what's causing the gap. My suspicion, corroborated by other research, is that women prefer social harmony. No matter how well-intentioned, we must never ban speakers or silence students. The consequences of allowing censorial people to control the discourse on campus have proved calamitous. Anyone seeking to stifle debate for the sake of emotional comfort must be publicly reminded that our most vital tools for righting the wrongs of society depend on being able to openly confront controversial opinions. And going back to the last line of that, which I think has been talked about quite a bit as well by other people. I've looked at some stuff about it. Women prefer social harmony. They want everything to be the same, everything to be equal. They want all the equality. They don't want anybody to be upset. It's the helicopter mom kind of a thing. Like, dads, by and large, are more likely to let a kid fail, let a kid fuck up, let a kid have something blow up in their face, and like, learning from your mistakes and learning from your failures is a valuable lesson. It's chaos. It's pandemonium. It hurts. It's ugly. Women don't like that. It makes them uncomfortable. They want everything to be in perfect harmony and everything to be good and peachy keen all the time. So that's why they're less tolerant of even their own political allies. Because if their political allies, while they may be left-leaning in certain ways, if they don't agree about other things, that could be disruptive. That could bust up that harmony. And so they want to root out all of that. Whereas men, we more or less thrive on chaos. Like, for me personally, if things are like really smooth and easygoing, especially at work, or stuff that I'm doing that I'm really interested in and want to be invested in it. If it's all going really easy and smooth, it gets fucking boring. Like, if I can just sit at my desk all night and click, 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 and tap, 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 and not really have to do anything, oh my God, I'm bored to death. I'm going to end up sleeping at my desk half the night, if not more than that. But when things are crazy and it's chaos and like it seems like everything's going wrong, that's when I'm in my element. That's when I'm in my prime. I thrive on that. That's when I get locked in and super focused, and now everything rolls. And not just does everything roll and everything gets better, it goes back quicker, and I'm enjoying it. Like, when I worked in the grain industry, I loved harvest season. And for those who aren't don't have an agricultural background or anything, Harvest season is when the combines roll and the farmers are in the fields and they are out harvesting. And if you work in a grain elevator, that means when you get to the elevator, when you get to work at 6 o'clock in the morning, there is already a line of trucks 1.5 miles down the road. And you will be here for the next 15 to 18 hours. And it is going to be absolute pandemonium and insanity for the next 15 to 18 hours. And I thrived on it. That was my favorite time of year. The rest of the year, I was bored to fucking tears. But when harvest hit, I was in my element. I'd work 7 days a week, 20 hours a day for 3 months straight and never miss a fucking lick. Men thrive in those environments. Women do not. They need order and stability. And so that's why you see the not just the lack of tolerance for political adversaries, but also for their own political allies who may have disagreements with them. And talking about those political leanings, why do young women tend to lean more to the left, while the young men have seemed to stay sane? Bill Ackman quote tweeted a graph showing the partisan gap between young men and women has almost doubled in 25 years. And we can look at the graph itself and the comments on it, but it's right here. Political scientists and data quants have been telling us this for half a decade. Women have moved radically leftward at a scale and speed with no modern precedent, while men have, on the whole, remained largely steady and unchanged. The partisan gap between young men and women almost doubled in the last 25 years. And so there's a 12-point gap. So to the bottom is leans more conservative. And you can trace this out from around 2000 out to 2025. Men tended to lean more conservative throughout the entirety of this. And women have, except for a notable point from around 2003 to 2005, tended to lean more left. But what you've seen going from like 2016, 18, around the time Trump came into office, I wonder, TDS should be a certifiable and researched mental illness. Around 2015, 2016, you see women start to really, really shoot up on the liberal leaning, while men, more or less, it took a small spike, but kind of evened out and more or less stayed about the same. It started to come back up again here over the last couple of years. Women on the other side have started to come back down a little bit, trending slightly more conservative than, say, 5 years ago, but still very, very liberal. But the gap went from a 12-point gap between women and men and their liberal leaning versus conservative leaning to now it's a 23-point gap. Women are way more liberal than what they were. And men, if you go and look at the chart, are almost even, almost right where they were literally 25 years ago. A good question. And most of the answers I've seen are either tribal, women are emotional, or surface level, social media bad. Neither traces the actual mechanism. So let me try. First, notice what Wayne pointed out. And this is Wayne's post. I'll just read it. I'm not going to switch over to it. It seems pretty clear to me that what we've been told about radicalization for the last 10 years is exactly the opposite of what's happened in reality. We've been told that men are increasingly radicalized to the right and that this is a bad thing. What's actually happened is that women have increasingly radicalized to the left. This doesn't really get talked about much, but to the extent that it does, it will in every single case be framed as a good thing. Like, how crazy is that? And for any of the males watching this, we have been categorized as like becoming these right-wing extremists, these alt-right MAGA, neo-Nazi fascists, while in reality we're still pretty much the same dudes that we were 25 years ago. The women, on the other hand, have become the insane, woke, feminist leftoids. And nobody wants to talk about that as being like definitely not a good thing. Then I mean, just look at every fucking TikTok video and Instagram reel, and like they've gone off the deep end. Why? We've been told for a decade that men are radicalizing to the left. All right. So the story we are told is exactly inverted from reality. And when female leftward movement gets discussed, it's framed as progress. Women becoming more educated, more independent, more enlightened. They'll tell you the graph shows enlightenment and progress. Wrong. The graph shows is capture. And this isn't just America. Before getting into mechanism, something important, this pattern isn't only American, it's global. The Financial Times documented it last year. The gender ideology gap is widening across dozens of countries simultaneously. In UK, Germany, Australia, Canada, South Korea, Poland, Brazil, Tunisia, young women moving left on social issues, young men either stable or drifting right. And here's another chart for those who are watching the video and looking at it, and you can see now South Korea, and we'll talk about it. South Korea is a pretty extreme case, but you see men going relatively sideways, slightly more to the right, while the women just like shoot the moon going to the left. This matters because it rules out explanations specific to American politics. It's not Title IX policy. It's not Me Too. It's not the specific culture war of U.S. campuses. Something bigger is happening, something that rolled out globally or at roughly the same time. South Korea is the extreme case. Young Korean men are now overwhelmingly conservative, and young Korean women are overwhelmingly progressive. The gap there is even wider than the U.S. Contributing factors include mandatory military service for men, 18 months of your life, the state takes while women are exempt, and brutal economic competition. But the timing of divergence still tracks with smartphone adoption. Whatever is causing this, it's not American. The machine is global. The substrate. Start with the biological hardware. Women evolved in environments where social exclusion carried enormous survival costs. You can't hunt pregnant. You can't fight nursing. Survival required the tribe's acceptance, their protection, their food sharing, their tolerance of your temporary vulnerability. Millions of years of this, and you get hardware that treats social rejection as serious threat. And again, this goes back to the first article that talked about the need for harmony, the need for everything to be, nice and balanced. No, like the lack of chaos that they not just prefer, but require. Men face different pressures. Hunting parties, gone for days, exploration, combat. You had to tolerate being alone, disliked, outside the group for extended periods. Men who could handle temporary exclusion without falling apart had more options, more risk-taking, more independence, more ability to leave bad situations. Male status still mattered enormously for reproduction. Low-status men had it rough, but men could recover from temporary exclusion in ways that were harder for pregnant or nursing women. This shows up in personality research. David Schmidt's work across 55 cultures found the same pattern everywhere. Women average higher agreeableness, higher neuroticism, sensitivity to negative stimuli, including social rejection cues. Men average higher tolerance for disagreement and social conflict. The differences aren't huge, but they're consistent across every culture studied. Not better or worse, different selection pressures, different adaptations. But it means the same environment affects them differently. Consensus pressure hits harder for one group than the other, the machine. Now look at what we built. Social media is a consensus engine. You can see what everyone believes in real time. Disagreement is visible, measurable, and punishable at a scale. The tribe used to be 150 people. Now it's everyone you've ever met, plus a world of strangers watching. And look at the timeline. Facebook launched in 2004, but was college only until 2006. The iPhone launched in June of 2007. Instagram in 2010. Suddenly, social media was in your pocket and in your face all day, every day. Here's some charts on cell phone usage just over the years. If you want to have a look at that. Look at the graph again. Women were roughly stable through the early 2000s. Here's the graph again. Early 2000s. Pretty stable, right? And then we get right here, 2007, 2010, 2012, when social media really started to take off. And now look, starts to ramp up. Not just ramp up like incrementally, exponentially, just takes off. How crazy is that? The curve steepens through the 2010s as smartphones became universal and platforms became more sophisticated. Women are by nature more liberal, but the radicalization coincides with the rise of smartphone adoption. The machine turned on and the capture began. The mental health collapse among teenage girls tracks almost perfectly with smartphone adoption, with stronger effects for girls than boys. The same vulnerability that made social exclusion more costly in ancestral environments made the new consensus engines more capturing. This machine wasn't designed to capture women specifically. It was designed to capture attention, but it captures people more susceptible to consensus pressure more effectively. Women are more susceptible on average, so it captured them more. And if you think about it, think of like the social media influencers, the people that, the TikTokers and the Instagram, the Insta thoughts, like the people who are on that, who make the most content on that, who really kind of hang the most of their lives on that. By and large, it's women. Like men are far less driven by the clicks and the likes. I had a guy that works for me asked like how much money I make off this podcast. I'm like, nothing. I do this for shits and giggles. This is like, I pick stuff that I want to talk about and that I think are interesting, and then I talk about it. And I could not give a single solitary fuck if nobody listens to it at all. I want to talk about this stuff. This is all for me. This is all for my own personal gratification. And if you get something out of it, that's awesome. And I appreciate you for watching or listening, subscribing. I do like it when you click like and you share it with your friends, but I don't give a fuck. It's not going to bother me one way or the other. I love negative comments on my videos because that gives me somebody to fuck with. Women, on the other hand, they get negative comments on stuff and they have absolute fucking meltdowns. And I know because I go and deliberately try to see if I can drive them to a fucking meltdown. It's hilarious and amazing. Like, this is so on the nose. Add a feedback loop. Women complain more than men. Surprise, surprise. Scroll any platform, and it looks like women are suffering more. Institutions respond to this because visible distress creates liability, PR risk, and regulatory pressure. In addition, women are weaker and inevitably seen as a victim in most scenarios. The institutional response is to make environments safer. Again, we went back to the first article talking about, the harmonization of everything, which means removing conflict, which means censoring disagreement, which means the consensus strengthens. The counter-arguments get removed or deplatformed, and the loop closes. Universities flipped to 60% female while simultaneously becoming progressive monoculture. The institution young women trust most during the years their worldview forms feeds them a single ideology with no serious opposition. FIRE's campus speech surveys show the pattern clearly. Students self-censor, report fear of expressing views, cluster towards acceptable opinions. This isn't unique to women, but women are more embedded in higher education than men now, And the fields they dominate, humanities, social sciences, education, HR, are the most ideologically uniform. 4 years surrounded by peers who all believe the same thing, professors who all believe the same thing, reading lists pointing in one direction. Disagreement is not even rare, it's socially punished. You learn to pattern match the acceptable opinions and perform them. Then they graduate into female-dominated fields, HR, media, education, healthcare, nonprofits, where the monoculture continues. From 18 to 35, many women never encounter sustained disagreement from the people they respect. The feedback loop never breaks. Men took different paths: trades, engineering, finance, military, fields where results matter more than consensus, fields where disagreement is tolerated and even rewarded. The monoculture didn't capture them because they weren't in the institutions being captured, mostly because they were kicked out of them, but that's a different piece. The economics. Marriage collapsed. This probably matters more than people think. Single women vote more left than married women. This is consistent across decades of exit polls. Part of this is likely economic. Single women interact with government more as a provider of services, where married women interact with government more as a taker of taxes. The incentives point different directions. The marriage gap in voting is one of the most consistent predictors. And marriage rates have collapsed precisely during the period of divergence. Men saw marriage collapse differently. Family courts, child support, alimony. The rational response was skepticism of expanding state power. Same phenomenon, different positions in it, different political responses. The algorithms optimize for engagement. Engagement means emotional response. Time on platform, clicks, shares, comments. Women respond more strongly to emotional content on average. They're more empathetic. They can be more easily manipulated with sad stories. That higher neuroticism again, higher sensitivity to negative stimuli. The machine learned this. It fed them content calibrated to their response patterns: fear, outrage, moral panic, stories about danger and injustice and threats and wars and victims. And you see this all the time in the videos these women do. And you sit and you watch and you listen to the things they say, and you're like, they don't even live in reality. Like, where is this coming from? It's this fucking feedback loop that they're stuck in, because that's what they respond to. And anything that breaks, like anything that disagrees with that even a little bit. Remember what we talked about from the first article? Like even their political allies, if they catch disagreement, even from that, they shut that shit down. They cannot have anything breaking that harmony. Women ended up in information environments optimized for emotional activation. Men found alternatives: podcasts, forums, cars, wars, manosphere, etc. Oh, I skipped a paragraph. Men got different feeds because they responded to different triggers. The algorithm doesn't have a gender identity or a gender agenda. It has an engagement agenda. But engagement looks different by demographics, and so the feeds diverged. Feminism told women their instincts and biology were oppression and wrong. Wanting children was brainwashing. Wanting a provider husband was internalized misogyny. Their natural desires were false consciousness installed by the patriarchy. And many believed it. They built lives around it: career first, independence, freedom from traditional constraints. Now they're 35, unmarried, measuring declining fertility against career achievements. And here's the trap. The sunk cost of admitting the ideology failed is enormous. You'd have to admit you wasted your fertile years on a lie. That the women who ignored the ideology and married young were right. That your mother was right. I think this is why you see so little defection. Not because the ideology is true, but because the psychological cost of leaving is higher than the cost of staying. Again, breaking that harmony. It's easier to double down. It's easier to believe the problem is that society just hasn't changed enough. I should be honest about something. Men weren't immune to the capture. They were captured differently. Women got ideological conformity. Men got withdrawal. Porn, video games, gambling app, outrage content. The male capture wasn't believe this or face social death. It was, here's an endless supply of dopamine so you never have to build anything real. And I think you see men trending more conservative because a lot of men are waking up to that reality. Different machines, different failure modes. Women got compliance. Men got passivity. Passivity. Fuck. That and femininity. I hate these words. English sucks. The male line on the graph staying flat through 2020 isn't necessarily health. It might just be different kinds of sickness. Men checking out instead of being pulled in. Or it may be that everyone and everything moved more left and women moved lefter. Wouldn't that be nuts? And the line is moving now. And there's an update. The male line isn't flat anymore. Post-2024 data shows young men shifting right. Recent surveys all show the same thing. Young men are now actively moving more conservative. My read? Women got captured first because they were more susceptible to consensus pressure. The capture was fast from 2007 to 2020. Men resisted longer because they were less susceptible and less embedded in captured institutions. But as the gap became visible and culturally salient, as men are the problem became explicit mainstream messaging, as men started being excluded from society because of lies, as masculinity, or the very thing that makes men men became toxic, men had to start counter-aligning. The pendulum, it swings one way and then it swings back the other. The passivity is converting into opposition. The withdrawal is becoming active rejection. This doesn't mean men are now correct or free. It might just mean they're being captured by a different machine, one optimized for male grievance instead of female consensus. Andrew Tate didn't emerge from nowhere, neither did the manosphere. Those are capture systems too, just targeting different psychological vulnerabilities. The graph is now two lines diverging in opposite directions, two different machines pulling two different demographics towards two different failure modes. Some people will say this is just education. Women go to college more. College makes you liberal. Simple as that. There's something to this, but it doesn't explain why the gap widens so sharply post-2007 or why it's happening in countries with very different education systems. Some will say it's economic. Young men are struggling. Resentment makes you conservative. Also partially true, but male economic struggles predate the recent rightward shift, and the female leftward move happened during a period of rising female economic success. Some will point to cultural figures, Tate for men, Taylor Swift for women, but these are symptoms, not causes. They filled niches in the machines created. They didn't create the machines. The multi-causal model fits better. Biological substrate, differential sensitivity to consensus. Hang on. Sorry. Feel my throat going a little bit there. Institutional amplification, captured universities and female-dominated fields, plus economic incentives, marriage collapse, state dependency, plus ideological lock-in, sunk costs, social punishment for defection. No single cause. A system of interlocking causes that happen to affect one gender faster and harder than the other. So what? If this model is right, some predictions follow. The gap should be smaller in countries with later smartphone adoption or lower social media penetration. This seems true. The divergence is less extreme in parts of Eastern Europe and much of Africa, though South Korea is a major exception due to other factors. The gap should narrow among women who have children, since parenthood breaks the institutional feedback loop and introduces competing priorities. Exit polls consistently show this. Mothers vote more conservative than childless women. The gap should continue widening until the machines are disrupted or the generations age out of them. And here's the part I don't know how to solve. These systems are self-reinforcing. The institutions aren't going to reform themselves. The algorithms aren't going to stop optimizing. The ideology isn't going to admit failure. The male counter-capture isn't going to produce healthy outcomes either. Some women will escape. The ones who have children often do, since reality is a powerful solvent for ideology. The ones who build lives outside of institutional capture sometimes do. Some men will stop withdrawing or stop rage scrolling, the ones who find something worth building. the ones who get tired of the simulation. But the systems will keep running on everyone else. So the question that Bill asked, why? The answer isn't women are emotional, and it isn't social media bad. The answer is that we built a global scale consensus engine and deployed them on a species with a sexually dimorphic psychology. The machines captured the half more susceptible to consensus pressure, and then they started capturing the other half through different mechanisms. We're watching the results in real time. 2 failure modes, 1 graph, both lines moving away from each other and away from anything healthy. I don't know how this ends. I don't think anyone does, and I don't think it will. Both machines are still running. I might disagree on the male side of it. With a son, 17, and him and his friends and other young men in the 30 and under age group that I know and talk to from time to time, some of them more regularly than others. I think a lot of young men are starting to do 2 things at once. They are starting to push back against that capture model, the one that pushed women more to the left. But they're not pushing back against it by going full Tate, manosphere, all of that stuff. They're not diving into the sad sack bullshit. They are building themselves and having fun with it. And I think males may continue to trend more conservative, but not in a reckless and self-destructive manner in the same way that females continue to trend more liberal. And all of that explanation of, the need for harmony and comfort and the different social models that kind of drive what women believe and what they expect and what they respond to, kind of goes to this last article that I'm going to try to run through pretty quick. The problem with speaking your truth. You've probably seen Hillary Clinton's essay in The Atlantic by now. You know the one accusing half the country of waging a war on empathy, where she positions empathy itself as the dividing line between moral legitimacy and moral rot. The piece, while predictable and nakedly manipulative, exemplifies a familiar maneuver, the substitution of emotional alignment for argument, the moral accusation for analysis. Empathy, in Clinton's framing, isn't a human capacity to be exercised with judgment or limits. It's a loyalty test. Again, we go back to the harmony thing. You either feel the sanctioned emotions in response to the approved narrative, or you're positioned as morally suspect. Compassion becomes the metric by which political opponents are judged, not by what they believe or propose, but by whether they exhibit the approved emotional response. Harmony. Disagreement isn't treated as a difference of interpretation or priorities. It's treated as evidence of ethical failure. If you don't believe everything I believe exactly the way I believe it, then you must be a Nazi. You must be a bad person. You must deserve to die. I mean, is what they basically boil it down to these days. This move has become so normalized that it barely registers anymore, but it points to something deeper and more corrosive than partisan rhetoric. It reveals how empathy itself has been transformed into a weapon, and how phrases like speaking your truth have come to function less as invitations to understand and more as tools for shutting conversations down. I didn't always see this clearly. I spent years inside women's and gender-studied classrooms where language like lived experience, the personal is political, and my truth wasn't just common, it was foundational. These phrases weren't offered as rhetorical flourishes. They were treated as epistemology, as a way of determining what counted as knowledge. Experience wasn't something you brought into the room to be explained alongside evidence, history, or competing explanations. It was something closer to authority. And once it was invoked, questioning it wasn't framed as inquiry, it was framed as harm. Like, people make fun of the my facts don't care about your feelings, Shapiro thing or whatever, but this over-reliance on empathy, using empathy as a weapon, has driven that, where that the feelings don't care about the facts. And in fact, the feelings override the facts. It doesn't matter what the objective truth is. It's what's my truth, which has done as much harm, going back to the last article and the machine that is the capture machine that is constantly pushing women more to the left. It stems from a lot of this kind of stuff, which goes back to the first article, because women require more of that harmony and that unity. They don't want to feel like anything's going wrong. The need for no chaos, no disagreement. See how all this ties together? At the time, I accepted this framework without much resistance. It felt humane or corrective, like a long overdue response to voices that had been ignored. Only later did I realize something important had been smuggled in along the way: the idea that subjective experience and shared reality belonged in the same category. They don't. Subjective experience is real and it matters. It shapes how people interpret the world and move through it, but it's also internal, private, and non-transferable. It tells you how something felt to someone, not necessarily what happened, why it happened, or what it means at scale. Shared reality is different. It's external. It's negotiated. It's the space where claims are tested, compared, revised, and sometimes rejected. It's the reason disagreement exists at all. It's the thing we argue over precisely because none of us owns it outright. When those two domains collapse into one another, empathy starts doing the work it was never meant to do. And when that collapse becomes moralized, conversations stop working altogether. Empathy, properly understood, allows you to understand another person's inner state without surrendering your capacity for judgment. It's a bridge, not a verdict. But increasingly, empathy is treated as a moral command with only one acceptable conclusion. You aren't being asked to understand someone's perspective. You're being asked to adopt it fully, or risk being cast as deficient, cruel, or dangerous. This is where Gad Saad's idea of suicidal empathy becomes useful, not as provocation, but as a diagnosis. The problem isn't that people care too much, it's that empathy has been detached from reality testing and limits. When that happens, it stops functioning as a human skill and starts functioning as an epistemic shortcut. Emotional alignment replaces argument and becomes the standard for legitimacy. And feeling the right way becomes proof that you're right. See this happening all over social media right now with a number of different topics and what's going on in the world. Once empathy is used in this way, disagreement no longer needs to be answered. It only needs to be pathologized. Jeez. I don't know why I have so much trouble with words that have this. Anyway, it's like the ITI and the OTO. I get all, my tongue don't want to do it. This is part of being a redneck who doesn't speak good English. Pathologized. There. Got it. This shift has been reinforced by the spread of therapy language far outside its original context. Therapy is designed to help people make sense of their internal worlds. It gives names to emotions, patterns, and boundaries that might otherwise remain confusing. That work is valuable in personal and clinical settings, but problems arise when that language migrates wholesale into public discourse and begins doing work it was never designed to do. Phrases like my truth or my lived reality now function less as descriptions and more as shields. They signal sincerity, but they also preempt scrutiny. Once they're on the table, the burden subtly shifts. The listener isn't being asked to think or respond or weigh claims. They're being asked to accept, affirm, and step carefully. Unless you're like me and you view that as a door that needs to be kicked through. Anyway. Gosh, I think my daughter said something about her truth one time or her lived experience, and then she was crying. I don't fuck around with that shit. And she's better for it. Thank you very much. This has consequences, and one of them is that feelings become immune to examination. Not respected, but protected. That's an important distinction. Respecting someone's feelings doesn't require treating them as a conclusive evidence about the world. When every claim rooted in emotion is treated as untouchable, even well-intentioned disagreement starts to feel taboo. Another consequence is the quiet collapse of falsifiability in everyday conversation. Claims used to carry an implied openness to being wrong. That wasn't a personal failure, it was just the cost of participating in a shared reality. Now, many claims arrive tightly sealed. They're presented in a way that leaves no room for revision, not because they've been rigorously tested, but because testing them would feel cruel. When falsifiability disappears, discussion stalls, evidence becomes optional, and consensus becomes something you're expected to signal rather than arrive at. This also helps explain why disagreement now feels so intense. When beliefs are fused with identity, and identity is fused with moral worth, questioning a claim doesn't feel like questioning an idea, it feels like questioning a person. Pushback lands as rejection, curiosity reads as hostility, and neutrality gets interpreted as aggression. As toxic as I believe identity politics to be, it's worth noting that people aren't reacting in a vacuum. They're responding to a framework that taught them their inner narrative is inseparable from their legitimacy. The academic roots of this framework matter. In women's and gender studies, the phrase, "the personal is political," was meant to highlight how structural forces show up in private lives. That insight wasn't necessarily wrong, but what went wrong was the way it hardened. Personal experience stopped being a starting point for analysis and became the conclusion. Lived experience wasn't something to be examined alongside data, history, or competing accounts. It was treated as sufficient on its own. And if you challenged it, you weren't missing information, you were missing empathy. This approach produces fragile conversations and brittle coalitions. It trains people to guard their narratives instead of refining them, and it also creates a strange asymmetry where some experiences are elevated to unquestionable truth while others are dismissed as bias or ignorance. And what about my lived experience? What about my truth? If my lived experience and my truth doesn't meet up with what the consensus has decided lived experience and truth should be, then I'm a bigot. I mean, I'm a bigot, but not for that reason. The criteria for whose experience counts often has less to do with accuracy and more to do with ideological alignment, as shown so eloquently in Hillary Clinton's essay. None of this requires mocking emotion to say out loud. Feelings matter, of course. Testimony can reveal blind spots. Experience often alerts us to problems we haven't measured yet. But none of that exempts claims from being compared, contextualized, or challenged. Caring about people doesn't require abandoning standards for truth. In fact, the opposite used to be the case. Taking someone seriously meant engaging with what they said, not tiptoeing around it. The cost of abandoning shared reality is that we lose the ability to correct each other without cruelty. We also lose the ability to be corrected without collapse. When every disagreement carries moral weight, conversations become exhausting. People retreat into smaller circles where affirmation is guaranteed and friction is minimal. Nothing sharpens, nothing gets cleared, everything just gets louder and more annoying. Your truth can be sincere and still be wrong. That used to be obvious. It was understood as part of living alongside other people with different vantage points and partial information. We didn't treat that tension as violence. We treated it as the work of being human together. If we want that back, we'll have to relearn how to separate experience from authority and emotion from evidence without denying the reality of either. Having deep empathy means being able to say, I hear you and I respect your experience, but your feelings do not determine reality. It means understanding that the world doesn't get better when we protect feelings at the expense of truth. If this is a war on empathy, then reality is the casualty. And the people insisting we sacrifice it are the ones pulling the trigger. I thought that tied in well because she talks about her time working in some of the more feminist areas of colleges and stuff like that. And that's where you see a lot of this is from the female, more feminist side. And again, it all ties, these things all tie together. And this is all just one big, it's why I chose to do all three of these in the order I did. and all in the same show because it's all interconnected. And now we got to break that feedback loop. And I think young men are getting there. But holy shit, how do you break women out of that? I don't know. I really don't. The collapse of modern technology would probably be the best thing for society to ever happen. And I gotta say, I'm 100% on board with it. It would be fantastic if the internet died tomorrow. I would be fine. I think I would be fine. I might need to get some of y'all's phone numbers, but I think we'd make it as a species. And I think it would be for the better. Not that I wish for that or anything. I do like my internet. I do like playing video games online and talking to all of you fuckers and all of that. But losing all of that would probably make a world of difference. And it would probably be the most beneficial for women. Maybe then that would break this cycle of becoming more and more progressive and progressively more and more batshit fucking crazy. Something to chew on. Speaking of, if you're watching this, you probably know how to contact me. Send me your number so I can talk to you, outside of social media, in case my wish does come true and the internet collapses. And then the only way I got to get a hold of you is through a phone. And then you can get a one-on-one fact check this every week or day if you want. Anyway, hit me up. Holler at me. Hope you have a good rest of your week. And I will be back next week with, I'm not sure, hopefully with Jay Forte talking about Lord of the Rings, but that's not confirmed yet. So we'll see how that goes. All right. Later.